There's a specific type of person who remembers rewinding a VHS tape before returning it to Blockbuster, and also remembers the exact week they downloaded their first MP3. Not someone who only knows streaming. Not someone who never touched a cassette. Someone who lived through both, back to back, right in the middle of figuring out who they were. In this video, we are going to talk about the psychology of Xennials. Some researchers call them the Oregon Trail generation, people born between 1975 and 1985, and why their specific slice of history created something that most generational research still hasn't fully explained. If you were born in that window, psychologists spent decades unsure what to do with you. Too young for Gen X, too old for Millennials. Neither box ever quite fit. In 2014, sociologist Sarah Stankorb gave this group a name for the first time: Xennials. After the computer game many of you played in school, always navigating uncertain terrain with limited supplies, figuring out the next move as you went. That's more accurate than it sounds. Most generational frameworks work in wide sweeps. Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z. Xennials are maybe 8 or 9 years wide. That's not a generation. That's a very specific moment. And what happened inside that moment left a mark the broader categories simply can't explain. Think about what life actually looked like before the internet existed. You waited by the radio to catch your favorite songs, hoping to record them on tape so you could play them later. You passed notes in class on carefully folded pieces of paper. You saw the TV screen fading into color stripes and static. You made plans to meet someone at a specific corner at a specific time, then showed up and waited no way to check if they were running late. You either showed up or you didn't, and people remembered which one you were. If you missed a TV show, it was just gone. And your mistakes, the fight at that party, the embarrassing thing you said in front of the wrong person, that phase in 9th grade, they faded. Nobody archived it. Nobody screenshotted it. It lived in a few people's memories and slowly softened, the way memories do, when nothing is there to keep them sharp. Psychologists call this autobiographical memory reconsolidation, the brain's natural ability to edit what we store and release what no longer serves us. Growing up in a world that allowed that process meant your past could become a story, not a permanent file you had to live inside forever. Then, just as you were stepping into your late teens and early 20s, everything changed. Not slowly, almost overnight. Email, mobile phones, broadband, MySpace. Within a few years, the world you grew up in essentially stopped existing, and a completely different one appeared in its place. Research published in Nature Neuroscience found that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for learning new systems and adapting to complexity, keeps developing until around age 25. Xennials hit the entire digital revolution inside that window. Gen Xers had to learn the internet the way an adult learns a second language, functional, sometimes fluent, but never quite effortless. Younger Millennials and Gen Z grew up inside it. For them, the internet isn't a tool, it's the water they swim in. Xennials are the only group that holds both. You remember what it felt like to leave the house and be genuinely unreachable for hours. And you also move through 17 different messaging platforms without anxiety, not because you're exceptional, because the developmental window was open at exactly the right moment and then it closed. Psychologists call this cognitive bilingualism, the ability to operate fluently in two distinct systems. What Xennials developed was the technological version of that. But here's the part that almost nobody talks about. It's the early 2000s. First real job, first apartment, first real attempt at building something. And within 2 years, the floor drops the dot-com bust. You rebuild carefully, slowly, and just as you're hitting your most stable years, 2008 hits again. Economists call this a scarring effect. Financial instability during your early career doesn't just set you back, it rewires how you think about security, risk, and permanence. The psychological imprint stays forward even decades after your situation improves. You can see it in quiet, small decisions. The emergency fund that never feels quite large enough. The backup plan built even when there's no obvious reason to need one. The slight hesitation before committing to something permanent, even when everything looks fine. That's not anxiety, it's muscle memory. Your nervous system remembering something your mind has already moved past. Here's where the psychology gets genuinely interesting. Think about the last time you were in a room with a mix of ages, older colleagues who want process and structure, younger ones who want speed and autonomy. Notice who translated without being asked, who absorbed the friction from both sides and made the whole thing function. Probably you. Researchers call it the burden of the middle, the fatigue that accumulates in people who are perpetually translating between worlds without anyone thinking to ask what it costs them. Over time, it stops feeling like effort. It starts feeling like just who you are, which makes it very easy to miss how much it's actually taking. If you've spent years being the reliable one and felt a tiredness underneath that you couldn't quite name, that's not a personality trait. That's what it costs to hold things together for a long time without ever putting them down. What seems to define Xennials, underneath all of it, is this: the ability to hold contradictions without needing to resolve them. Independent but collaborative, skeptical but open, analog in instinct, digital in execution. You remember what was lost in the transition, but you're not romantically stuck in the past. You appreciate what was gained, but you're not naive about the cost. Psychologists who study post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where difficulty produces genuine psychological expansion, point to one variable that predicts it more reliably than any other: the ability to hold complexity, to not collapse painful contradictions into clean answers. Xennials didn't develop that as a lesson. They developed it by surviving their own timeline. You watched a world end, not with an announcement or a ceremony, just slowly, then suddenly, the way things change when you're not watching directly. And then you watched another one begin, old enough to know what was being left behind, young enough to move into what came next without getting stuck at the border. Most people get one world, but you got the scene. And if the ground keeps shifting for everyone around you and you're somehow still steady, that's not luck. It can't be taught. It can only be lived through. If this is the kind of content that makes you stop and think, subscribe. That's what this channel is for. I'll see you in the next one. Until that, take good care of yourself.